Shalom. My name is Tirza Lewis. I am with Direct Akkad, One Way Israelite House of Study. Today, I'm going to go through a presentation, and it's called Torah Homeschool Family. And the presentation, it's really meant for anyone who is thinking about homeschooling their children, or are new to homeschooling their children. When Morey Adanyahu and I started our journey of homeschooling, we didn't really know anyone who homeschooled their children. We knew a couple families, but we weren't really close to them. And it was a journey. And so what we're trying to do is we're hoping that amongst Hebrews, amongst people who observe the Torah, that the movement of our families will start coming away from the education system, coming away from the school system, and start bringing, educating our children into our homes, and bringing Torah and bringing the morality that the Most High has given to us into the educating of our children, bringing the values that we have from the scriptures and from that Ruach HaKodesh, which dwells inside of us, cultivating our seeds, cultivating our young plants, and bringing them up in a way that is edifying unto the Most High every day, and at all times. And so this presentation is just geared towards that. And there is more information on our website, and you can also contact us if you have any questions. So this is just going to be an overview about homeschooling within our communities. So I'm going to start the presentation. Okay. You can find us on the web, www.directaccad.com. And we also have a blog, which is torahhomeschoolfamily.blogspot.com. So our first slide here is why homeschool. And, we're going to incorporate the first principle, which is Torah. Deuteronomy 6 verses 6 through 7 says, "And these words which I am commanding you today shall be in your heart, and you shall impress them upon or teach them diligently to your children. And you shall speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up." A practical application of these verses is that we should impress. The Hebrew word is shanan, which means to prick, to sharpen, to impel, to teach. This requires us to be repetitive. It requires us to take a spear and prick the hearts of our children, to prick them, to teach them, to work with them, to mold them, to shape them. Shanan. We're to diligently do this. This isn't something that we should just do in a lax manner. This isn't something that it should be a voluntary, or it should be optional, I should say. That's a better word. This is a requirement. We should teach our children the commandments of Yahweh. We should teach them to love him, to listen to him, to obey him, to serve him. And this is something that we should do every day of our lives. The main legacy that we leave to our children is not monetary. It's not houses, it's not land, but it's the fear of Yahweh, the fear of Yahweh, the love of Yahweh, this faith that we have in him. And this teaching, the Torah tells us, should happen all day, when we lie down, when we rise up, when we go along the way, when we sit in our house. And so the best way to do this is to actually have our children with us more often than not. And so according to the Torah, there is a commandment that's placed upon us to do this, to diligently teach them. Why homeschool? Let's look at family. The way that we have been kind of taught in our culture is that we kind of segment learning. We have teaching our children morality, which happens at home. And then we have teaching our children their A's, their B's, their C's, teaching them how to add, subtract, how to read, teaching them science, teaching them social studies, and all geography. All of these things happen in the school. However, when we homeschool our children, educating them, it's all encompassing. It's morality, it's character, but it's also reading and writing. It's also learning how to ride your bike. It's also learning how to share with your friends. Education is part of raising our children. It's not something that we're delegating per se, or paying the school system to do, but it's something that we are taking and we're bringing it into our homes and we're bringing it into our families. It's where the mothers can teach the children, the fathers can teach the children, aunts and uncles, cousins, everyone is involved in this. It becomes a household learning environment. The family learns together. We can instill our own values into our children. We don't have to trust strangers to teach our children. We don't have to trust strangers who have different values. They've come up in different environments, sometimes in different cultures. Sometimes they have different priorities in life, different financial backgrounds. We don't have to trust these people that we don't know their values. We don't know their priorities. We don't know their backgrounds. We don't know what happens in their homes. We don't know the people they're involved in. We don't need to trust these people who may not or may have the same faith that we have in the Most High. We don't have to trust our children to be under those teachers and those authoritative structures. We can do it ourselves, and we can instill the trust, the value, and the Torah in our children. The world is our classroom. Every moment is a teachable moment. I think about sometimes when I'm in the public and maybe something happens, maybe someone does something wrong to me, and how I respond to that. My children can see how I'm able to face adversities on a daily basis. They can go shopping with me and watch how I make a shopping list and how I pick different foods to eat. Maybe we can talk about vegetables while we're in a store, nutrition and vitamins. When we're in the snow, we can talk about snow. When we're in the rain, we can talk about rain. We can talk about the seasons. We could talk about so many things as we go along the way. And as my children have different social interactions with people, we can discuss differences between us and maybe another family, and maybe how they raise their children and how we raise our children, or just as thoughts come into their mind. In that moment, we can have a teaching moment. And this is what educating and bringing and taking it away from a school mentality where it happens in one location and, maybe they do homework at home, but taking ourselves outside of that school mindset and seeing it as us raising our children, and bringing up the next generation that will serve the Most High Yahweh. I'm just going to briefly hit on the modern education system because this is something that I was raised up in, and I'm sure that mostly everyone in America was raised up in. You went to school. At the age of 5, you started kindergarten. You was expected to graduate. I was expected to go to college, and afterwards you're expected to get a job. The education system that we know of today was primarily invented in the mid-1800s. Before that, there were schools and private tutors and different things like that that people paid for. However, starting around the mid-1800s was when public education was really coming into fashion. And before this time, education wasn't a requirement in many states. It started to become a requirement in states within the mid-1800s to the early 1900s. The education system was geared towards transforming the workforce in America from a primarily agricultural and apprenticeship training workforce to an industrial factory workforce. This was also a time when a lot of immigrants from different European countries was coming to America to work in the factories, to work in the coal mines, to work on the railroad systems and different things like that. And so there was an amount of assimilation that was also built into the education system. And part of this was, of course, glorifying different colonial conquests and different things like that to make people feel more American as children growing up. And also to kind of break them away from their homelands and to kind of identify with America, identify with the American culture that was developing at that time, identify with the founding fathers, so to speak, and to also, work in the factories and in the different industries that was developing at that time. As a result, it followed a factory structure. There was a standard curriculum that everyone had to abide by, just like when you would go to work, you'd have a standard set of rules and set of expectations that you would have. Grades also started to become popular. And again, this is kind of coming from a factory mindset as well, where if you have shoes and, they come off the production line, what grade do you give those shoes? And a certain grade is able to go out for sale and a certain grade gets rejected. As one class would finish, another class would come along. And so this is similar to an assembly line. A lot of times when there were private tutors, the private tutor could teach the child at different levels and kind of, work with them one-on-one. However, whenever this classroom and this, different grade level things started more so occurring, there had to be a system to progress the children through. The education system is very successful, and it has been very successful for many years. It helps the United States to remain competitive with other nations. And you will see that I'm not sure when the federal government really started getting involved, but there's certain acronyms that we all are familiar with. STEM is one of them, which is really trying to compete with other nations on a biomedical level, getting kids interested at an early age in science so they can go to universities and have science majors and technology majors. No Child Left Behind, Common Core. We look at our children in this country and compare them with the children in other nations, and we need to remain competitive. And so the education system, quote unquote, of course, is designed by the government to make that happen. It creates a future set of students to fill universities and colleges, and it creates a future set of employees to work for employers in order to boost the economy of the United States. But there's many flaws in this system. And, when we are looking at our faith, of course, Yahweh and biblical values are not at the center of public education. That is not the purpose or the goal of learning how to read and write and learning how to add and subtract. There is a skewed colonial view as well. And I hit on this before. But a lot of times it's taught that, America began when Christopher Columbus hit the soil, or the Caribbean soil, I should say, the West Indies. It's taught that, when we look at African Americans, we look at Black history, that our history began with slavery, and that the main people that we can look to are Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and Harriet Tubman and, different things like that. This is a colonial worldview. This is a skewed worldview. This is picking history, picking art, picking culture that glorifies desires and thoughts and minimizes Black history, minimizes African history, minimizes Native American history, makes our causes seem like they were not important, and makes our history and our culture something that isn't even, I'm just now learning things that I should have known about my culture, about my history as an adult. there's a standard curriculum that's taught, and it's really sad. Some people thrive in standard curriculum. I know that I thrived with standard curriculum. However, it leads to labeling. If you're really a lot better than the standard, you're gifted. If you're a little bit weaker and it takes you a little bit longer to learn these things, you're slow. Special education, if you can't sit in a desk for 8 hours a day, you're ADHD. It leads to labeling because everyone, all children, and all children have different learning styles, different learning paces. Children are pushed through subjects in when you have a standard education, because the whole class has to keep moving. We can't stop for one student. We have to keep going. And so this has led to a lot of children not liking subjects such as math, or not feeling comfortable reading in front of crowds, or not feeling comfortable speaking in front of people, because they've been pushed to a next level when they weren't ready. Children are not taught in school to focus on their interests. Now, I say traditionally in the slide because there are specialty schools that will take the time to, and teachers, I should say, that will take the time to focus on the interests of their students. But I'm speaking at a overall level, that children are taught a set curriculum. They read a set amount of books. When you're in 3rd grade, you learn this. When you're in 2nd grade, you learn that, etc. And they're not taught necessarily to think outside the box within school. You line up in line and you go to the bathroom, you sit in your seats and you raise your hands. All of these things are institutionalized things, and things that create order. However, they kind of create boxes and boundaries for students to think in. There's also social and safety issues. School is about 8 hours a day. And so when we send our children to school, unfortunately, they spend more time Monday through Friday in school away from us than they spend in our homes. And even when they come back home from school after being at school from sometimes 8 o'clock in the morning and coming home around 4, they have homework, and there's papers to fill out, and we have social engagements such as sports and things like that to do, eat dinner, go to bed again, and do it again the next day. So it's an incredible proportion of the day spent in school. There's intimidation that happens in school, competition, and this leads to self-esteem issues and peer pressure, bullying. There's unwanted social trends that are going on, that are being forced upon our schools, different agendas, and are our children even safe in school? Metal detectors at the doorways. My children, we went to a school to drop off paperwork, and they wanted to know why there was metal detectors they had to go through. And I had to tell them that, sometimes bad people try to come into the schools. And so this is to protect all the students going through metal detectors coming into the schools. And we've also seen, the rise in school shootings. I think I read in one report that there's on average about 5 school shootings a month across the country. And when you look at the number of schools, the ratio isn't that high. However, it's not, it doesn't discriminate. It can happen anywhere within the schools. There's sexual harassment, sexual experimentation that happens. Schools in better neighborhoods have more money than schools in poorer neighborhoods. And so those schools typically have a better education program. Typically, they have more extracurricular activities and produce better results, better test scores. That was something else about the education system, is that it's based off of test scores, standardized CAT tests, and SAT tests, and different tests that the students take throughout the year. That and these things don't weigh on the actual ability and knowledge of a student. It just weighs on their ability to understand things that are within the curriculum and on the test. Black students and students of color, such as Mexican students, are punished more severely for the same offenses as other races of students. And I actually do have some papers that I've read about this that I plan to publish or put links to on my blog. It really is a bad situation for our students within the school system. Homeschool is a solution. You know, we think about all the problems, and sometimes people will just say, I can't do anything about it, and throw their hands up and just give up and say, okay, whatever. I did it. It worked for me. I turned out to be a good person. Let's just try it with our children. So people feel obligated to partner with the school system in teaching their children. But when we look at it, we are the best advocates and teachers for our children. Yahweh gave us these children, and when he did, he knew what he was doing. And we are able to teach our children. We don't have to depend upon the education system to do it. We don't need to depend on strangers to do it. We are able to do it. But sometimes it just requires that we are more resourceful in figuring out how to go about it. So I'm just going to go through some slides. I think that was why, right? That was the why. And now we're going to go into the how. So how do we do this? How, you know, I went through all these reasons on why. So let's just look at how. What does it take? You know, a lot of times parents, when they're thinking about homeschooling, they don't know where to start because they don't know how to do it. And they don't know, you know, they don't know what the requirements, what the investment is going to look like and what it's going to be. Homeschooling takes time, first and foremost. It takes time for you to work with your children. It takes time for you to review things with your children and repeat yourself sometimes over and over again. It takes time for you to look for resources and look for different learning opportunities. It takes time for you to drive your children to different places, you know, during the week so that they can get different experiences. It takes discipline, because if you don't have discipline, and you know, it's just you wake up one day and you decide you're not going to do anything, and then you wake up the next day and you decide you're not going to do anything, well, your children aren't going to do anything either. So it takes discipline and you taking a responsibility and actually working and operating on it. It takes patience, because sometimes your children aren't going to learn things overnight. And it might, you know, it takes patience because sometimes it's trial and error. You know, we're going to talk about that. Trial and error, learning what works for your children and what doesn't, learning what works for you and what doesn't, learning what works for your family and what doesn't, and being resilient and saying, okay, that didn't work, but we're going to get up and we're going to try again. So being able to bounce back and being able to support your children and not put your children down as you're going through trial and error and as you're learning what works for you and what doesn't. It takes being able to find resources that engage your children and also fit your worldview, because there are so many resources out here. There's religious resources, secular resources. There's even Hebrew resources out here, and and you just have to be able to go out and find them and find what works for you, and be able to reject and put aside what doesn't work for you. There's different styles for homeschooling. Sometimes people think that, you know, homeschool is being in school when you're at home. So you was going to spend 8 hours in school. Well, you're going to spend 8 hours sitting at the kitchen table doing schoolwork. This is not the case. There are so many different styles for homeschooling, and my family blends pretty much all of the styles that I'm going to go through and combines them. And we some subjects we might do traditional, some subjects we might unschool, some things I might say, okay, what are you guys interested in learning? I try to find games, even at the thrift store. There's so many learning games at the thrift store, because I think that grandparents probably, this is my imagination, by the way, I imagine that the reason I can find learning games all the time at the thrift store is that grandparents find these things and they think they're a great idea and they give them to the children, and children are like, I spent a whole day learning the states. I don't want to learn this anymore. I spent a whole day learning my math facts. I don't want to learn this at home on the weekends. So a lot of game learning and things like that are just, I'm telling you, I find these things at the thrift store all the time. But let's just go through the list. Traditional homeschooling is learning with books, workbooks, learning with videos. And it's a very strict kind of setup. It's intentional. Like, I'm going to sit down with my child, or my child is going to sit down and work on 20 problems a day, 20 math problems a day, or they're going to work through this third grade writing book or this third grade grammar book. Traditional homeschooling, or there's a video that we're going to watch that's talking about the subject that we're learning. So it's looking and kind of structuring your education. Unschooling is teaching in a non-traditional environment and way. So, for example, a child might learn astronomy not just by looking in a book, but getting a telescope and, every night saying, go outside and see what you can find in the sky, and, or get on Google or Google Maps, Google Earth, or whatever. If you're learning about satellites, like, let's get out and figure out how satellites work. Or biology, let's go to the lake and, get some water and look at it under the telescope. Unschooling it's kind of deconstructed schooling. It's not as rigid as traditional homeschooling. There's student-led learning, which is what interests your child, teaching according to their interests. And you can also do this in conjunction with traditional learning and or unschooling. It's finding out what your child is interested in and teaching them that. There's game learning, which is learning with games, activities, and fun. That could include puzzles, that could include interactive games online. Sometimes sitting down with a page of math problems is boring. So maybe find a game. There's plenty of games online where the child might get a pop-up whenever they get a right answer online. There's travel learning, and this is good for families that are on the go. I spoke with someone whose wife is a professor, and they use every opportunity they can to travel around the world and to learn about different cultures and about different histories and things like that. Or just getting in the car and going on the road. So let's talk about where and when. When can I homeschool? The answer for that is whenever you want. There is no need to have a Monday through Friday school week. We have been brainwashed to think that everything we have to do is Monday through Friday. This is the factory mindset. And actually, it's probably in some countries Monday through Saturday because 6-day work week. For us in Torah, Sunday through Friday work weeks. We don't need to have a Monday through Friday school week. It's not a necessity. If you want it, if it's something that you think is good and it works for your family, that's fine, but it's not a necessary thing. Any time of day that works for your family. You don't have to operate between 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or whatever the hours are. If you go to work in the morning, you could school your children in the evening. If you work in the evening, you could school your children in the morning. You could school them in the middle of the day. Any time of day that works for your family, you can school. Hours. Now, I said the days of the week is flexible, but some states do have hour requirements. My state doesn't have hours. It says you have to school for 100. You have to document 180 days in Pennsylvania. So there are some specifications that some states have, and some of those are hourly specifications. However, none of these states have 8 hours that you have to do every day. And so school doesn't have to take 8 hours. When my children started out in the first grade and in the second grade with homeschooling, their attention spans really only allowed for 2 hours of them sitting in books. And when we got to the 2.5 hour mark, my son could probably go 2.5 hours, but my daughter, she was not able to go 2.5 hours. And so we did 2-hour days when we would do school, and when we would actually sit down and do school. However, when we would go to the library or whatever, when we would do different extracurricular type learning and activities, they would be able to learn for sometimes even longer. And so hours, we don't have to think in terms of 8-hour days. When to start school for the year and when to end school. The school year can begin at the end of the summer, like August or September 1st. Some people start. It could be an annual thing. You start your school year January 1st and you end your school year December 31st. Or it could be it could start the day after the child's birthday, or it can happen year round. We homeschool year round in our family, and I might talk about that later. The question is where to school. Where do you school? You can do it in your dining room, your living room, the bedrooms, outside on the lawn, on your porch, your patio, in the comfort of your home. It could be anywhere. Or you could create a dedicated space that has desks and whiteboards and things like that. So a classroom in your house. You could school at the library, or you could just school along the way. So we'll talk about curriculum. Curriculum is the basis of how your children learn. So they can learn using workbooks and books at age-appropriate levels. There's web resources, so many web resources. My children, we use Brain Pop, Vocabulary, education.com, K-12 Reader. I'm trying to think of the other ones we use, Khan Academy, for typing.com. There's so many web resources, and most of these are free, or they can be bought through co-op opportunities for more reasonable prices. You could go to the library. That's the basis of our history and our geography. It's just going to the library, and a lot of science as well. Finding books there. There are so many biographies that are written on a children's level now. Documentaries, Amazon and Netflix. Most people have that nowadays. And there's so many documentaries on there. YouTube also is a good way of pulling up historical videos, such as we watched Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. We watched JFK's inauguration. We've watched Nixon resign. All of these things are available on YouTube. And also learning things. YouTube teaches you you can learn how to sew. You can learn how to cook. You can learn different languages, even, all on YouTube. I don't recommend just allowing your children to get on YouTube by themselves. I always pull up YouTube for my children because there's also things on there that I don't want them to see. I don't want them to watch. I'm just giving suggestions on how to find curriculum, how to find resources, and you could take it or leave it as you choose. Field trips, going to the science centers, going to the museums, going to botanic gardens. These are just different ideas for field trips for your children. There's cyber school and correspondence schools. And for parents who are short on time, this can be a good option. A lot of times, cyber school will use the same curriculum that children use in traditional school. However, there are many opportunities that are coming up where parents are actually able to pick and choose what types of curriculum there's different tracks that these cyber schools offer. And another option is box curriculum sets. And this is how I started out homeschooling, because I really didn't know what to do. And so I just got I just got a box curriculum. I spent a lot of money on them for each of my children, and that's how I was able to start, and just kind of work from there as my baseline. And we got rid of books that didn't work, and we brought in books that did work, and different things like that. So we made adjustments, but a box curriculum set could be a good way to begin if you really don't know where to begin, which is where I was at. Okay, concerns. Again, I said that box curriculum set costs a lot of money. So there's financial concerns. If you have to buy books for your kids, if I got to pay, they could go to school for free. But I like to stress that homeschool can be free. There is no need to spend a fortune. Workbooks, I buy workbooks off christianbook.com. That is one of the cheapest resources that I have found, even cheaper than Amazon. But there are so many resources, even online, for free. And also, you could go to the library and you can learn pretty much any subject at the library. Our libraries have language classes. We just went to an electronics class a couple weeks ago at the library. They offer sewing lessons. There's so many different things that you can learn at the library. Another concern is I'm not a qualified teacher. I don't have a teaching degree. And some parents don't have a degree at all. Well, you don't need a degree to teach your children. Now there is a limit, of course, where, there are people who may not know how to read or how to write or how to add or subtract. And for, those parents, there's also a lot of online education resources that, you could find for your children, or even a good cyber school program might be appropriate for someone who really doesn't have a good education at all. But a basic education really is all that you need, and also a desire to learn with your children. I'm telling you, I learn more than my children when I teach them, and I retain things more because I find things fascinating as I'm learning with my children. Another question is, what about colleges and scholarships? And I don't have any graduates yet. However, I do know of some high school homeschool graduates. But from my understanding in the different forums that I've been part of, is that colleges love homeschool kids. And the reason that they love homeschool kids is because these are their thinkers. These are the people who will come up with ideas and think outside of the box. And they don't need to think within a set of rules and things like that. In fact, they can kind of break those thinking structures and rules. And one of the things that, as an undergraduate, we get taught this traditional education and things like that. But then as a grad student, we are kind of thrown upon us to break outside of those books and come up with our own ideas. When homeschooled kids go to college, they don't need to break outside of that set of what we learn in school. I don't need someone to teach it to me. I can go out and get it for myself. And also, for just for the sake of just saying this, that community colleges, including the community college in my area, offer free classes, free college credits for homeschooled high school students. So college, a homeschooled student can come and quote unquote graduate from high school, quote unquote, because they were at home, they wasn't in the school, but they could actually graduate from their homeschool with college credits. So we're going to talk about the big question, which is socialization. And I guarantee anyone who starts homeschooling that someone is going to get angry with you for socially depriving your child. It's just going to happen. You might be at the grocery store. You might be at the library. It might be a family member who's going to find out that you homeschool, and they're going to say, how dare you deprive your child of their socialization? And, there's two thought processes behind socialization. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. But the one is to learn how to interact with people. That's socialization. And surely we don't need our children to go to school to learn how to interact with people and learn, social norms and, how to be kind and how to share and how to give people space, personal space and different things like that. We don't need school to teach that to our kids. But one of the things that we need school for, according to this thought process, is we need school for our children to find friends and to be able to be around their friends. And this is not a problem. And it may have been a problem when homeschool was a little bit illegal. I know that in Pennsylvania, a lot of times, before we had standard laws for homeschooling and before homeschooling was legal for all 50 states, maybe people kept their children at home. But socialization does not need to be a problem because homeschool is legal in all 50 states. So there are homeschool groups, there are co-op groups, there are after-school programs, there are sports that your children, they could play soccer, basketball, baseball, they could take music lessons and art lessons. There are so many opportunities, and they can actually have the same friends that they would have had in school, just hang out with them after school. So it's not a problem. Children socialize and meet people along all lines of age, race, and interest. My children, they know a lot of people just from going to the library and interacting with the librarians, interacting with the children there, and taking art classes and going to soccer, being involved in soccer and going to their soccer games and being on different teams. They learn how to play with other children. We go on field trips. We just went on a field trip with 40 other children on Thursday. They are very socially involved. And so it doesn't have to be an isolation of your children. Your children can meet people of all colors and backgrounds now in homeschool communities because it's a growing trend. Especially as people are finding that there are so many problems in the school systems. So again, the last point I made here is that your children can actually have the same friends that they would have had in school. There's the same children that go to after-school activities as are in the classrooms at school. So school is not the determining factor of social relationships. Some of the, and another thing is that when take my children to these different activities, I'm there and the other children's parents are there. Now, this is for younger kids. And so if something happens, both parents are there to address the situation and both parents are there to address the children. And so, it doesn't have to be that your children come home and tell you a story that happened at school. You're actually there when the whole thing unfolds. And so you're able to address situations right on the spot. And I'm able to, if I see my child do something or whatever, I'm able to go and instruct my child right there. I'm just going to talk about some things that we've incorporated. Our first year homeschooling, I gave my kids a summer vacation and I found that they forgot so much stuff and I had to review and I was like, I don't want to review this anymore. So anyway, we said next year we're just going to school all year round. And so we do school we learn every day. We might not do book work every day, but we learn every day. And I try to instill in my children that if it's 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon and I say, hey, go get your math book, that it's not a problem. So we have everyday learning. We have scripture memory verses and we look at the scriptures and we break down the scriptures. We do weekly character quality lessons and we focus on trying to build their character and different scenarios that happen in their life. And we bring those things out and we say, okay, did we react in a good way to that? And sometimes if I made a mistake, I will even bring my own story to the table. So we focus on our character and we focus on how to bring out the best in us and in our children. Science that always bring glory to Yahweh. And we learn the Hebrew language early. We learn the Hebrew letters, and we're about to start getting into grammar with our children. We try to school around the feast days. So I definitely try to make the feast extra special because we don't have schoolwork, or we just have, maybe if we're out in the woods or something, that's a good opportunity to start to learn about the woods and things like that. So it really might be modified, but we school around Yahweh's feast days. And also moving away from a competitive mindset. I teach my children that they should learn at their own levels of proficiency, at their own potential. And we also teach our children that success isn't about getting a good grade. In fact, my son, I gave him a grade and he called it a score. So he doesn't even know what a grade is anymore. But success isn't about getting a good grade. It's not about going to college. It's what success is about being obedient to Yahweh, being obedient to his Torah, being a good moral person of upright character, and also the ability to be an entrepreneur. So I don't want to raise up children that go out and work in factories and go out and work for someone else and build up another person's business or another person's empire. But I want to raise my children and teach my children how to go out and how to work for themselves and how to be able to set their own schedules and not have to report to other people. My son to be able to support his family, and my daughter to be able to, if she does decide to go to school or something, be able to do things that are, or focus on things that are able to be money making for her and be a success in that arena, as opposed to going out and clocking in for another company. And if they want to and choose to do that, that's fine. However, success for me isn't having a booming career per se. It's about being able to work for yourself. State laws. Homeschool is legal in every state. But the laws are different by state. So homeschool laws are governed by the state, and the Homeschool Legal Defense Association is a great resource for finding out your homeschool laws.